Hi everybody, I'm Caroline Cormier, chemistry teacher and educational researcher, and I will be presenting to you a research that I conducted with my colleague Simon Langlois, who is a physics teacher as well as an educational researcher. And that research is about self-efficacy in oral communication in science. And we did that research here in Montreal, Canada, where we are based. We are both teachers here. And the reason that I'm doing this screencast of this presentation is because the conference at which this was supposed to be presented was cancelled for the reasons that you know about. So I'm taking the opportunity of doing this brief screencast, but if you would need the actual PowerPoint file, do not hesitate to contact me and I will send it to you. My email address is at the very end of the presentation. So here we go. Our research is based on post-secondary science students, and we know that at that level of education, it's really important that the students develop their oral communication skills because it's very, very important for scientists to be able to explain their research and even to construct, to build science knowledge. Oftentimes, it goes through a certain phase of oral communication within a group of research or something like that. But we notice that it's seldom taught in school at our level, at college level, and even before. And it's really important because it could be difficult for the self-confidence or self-efficacy of students to speak in front of a group. We based our research on a concept defined by Bandura in 1977, and that excerpt here is from 1986, the concept of self-efficacy. His definition, Bandura's definition, is that self-efficacy is the belief that one has about their own capacity of accomplishing a task. In our context, that would be in accomplishing an oral presentation. We know that the oral self-efficacy is linked to learning because it's a powerful predictor of motivation. Also, it helps decrease anxiety if you have high self-efficacy in that domain. It's also strongly correlated with student self-confidence, and it's related to a different concept, communication apprehension, which could be defined as the opposite of self-efficacy. If you have high communication apprehension, that might be because your oral self-efficacy is very low. We based ourselves on a model that was developed first by Van Alderen, Smith, Van der Molen, and Asma, and we actually submitted a paper this year, in the last few days actually, on that theoretical model adapted to the context of oral communication. And if you if you were to be interested in that paper, unfortunately, it was published. It is to be published in French because our language here in the province of Quebec is mostly French, and we teach in French, and our students have French as their mother tongue. But if you were interested in further results of our research, we are preparing a paper in English. So keep looking for that, and it should be published a bit later on. So the concept, the model that we used to frame our concept of oral communication is the model that we call perception and attitudes toward oral communication in science. And the action in that model is determined by three facets of the same action: the cognitive beliefs that students have, the part of related to the affect, and the perceived control the students feel. The cognitive beliefs, we ask students for what they think about the perceived relevance of oral communication. Do they find that important to learn and to develop those skills in school? The affect, that's the part that you can probably relate to, that it might be fun to do oral presentations, but for most people it causes a certain form of stress or anxiety. And the perceived control at the very rightmost part of the model, we place the self-efficacy there. So that's the way we built upon Bandura's model and Van Alderen-Smith's model. We have two research questions that I will be addressing in this presentation. That presentation is part of a larger study, so we have more results than this, but for today, I will talk to you about two things. Question one, what is the relationship between our students' perception of scientific oral communication, so the part about perceived relevance, anxiety, and enjoyment, and their self-efficacy, so the rightmost part of the model in this domain. And the question two is what students' experiences might explain their level of self-efficacy in oral communication, because we measure the self-efficacy and it varies quite a lot from student to student. We did our research in the fall of 2018. The map that you see here on the right is a map of Montreal and the region of Montreal and around. The biggest island that you see on the map, it's the island of Montreal. So as you can see, most of our colleges that participated in the study are close or into Montreal, but one is a bit more far on the right part at the northeast of the map. And for that, we recruited all the science students in those 7 colleges. The college in Quebec, it's really different from the rest of Canada, and it's quite different, I think, from other countries. The students have the mandatory education of 2 years prior entering university, so we call them pre-university colleges, and that's at that level that we teach. The students typically enter the colleges here at 17, 18 years old, and they stay with us for 2 years prior enrolling into a university program. So that's the reason we at the fall of 2018, we recruited all science students in those 7 colleges that were first year. We collected a bit over 1,000 questionnaires that were filled out, so 1,292 participants for that part of the study. 731 were female and 520 were male, and that's representative of the distribution in that program in college in Quebec. A bit more female students than male students. From those over 1,000 students that participated in the study by filling out the questionnaire, we picked out a subsample of 10 participants to conduct interviews, and I will be taking a bit more about that later. The instrument that was developed by our team specifically for that study and for the objectives of our study is, we call it PATOX. Yeah, PATOX. It's perception and attitudes towards oral communication in science. The questionnaire is in French, and the reference here that you can see, it's the reference of the paper that we submitted to explain how that questionnaire was developed and then validated. The questionnaire is in French, but it's adapted and modified from several other papers that were published, all of them in English. If you were to be interested in the questionnaire and you don't understand French, do not hesitate to contact us, and we will send you a rough translation, and you can maybe use it, maybe validate it on your own, because that could be really interesting, comparing two different languages, two different population of students with the same instrument. So the items were Likert type items at 4 levels. The level 1 was totally disagree, and then up to level 4 that was totally agree. And all the items were sentences about what students might feel during an oral presentation, how they can find it important or not. So the items were used to measure students' perceived relevance, anxiety, enjoyment, and self-efficacy. So the 4 concepts that are in our model. And then, yeah, we did a pre-validation and then a full validation. And I will talk about the full validation a bit, just here. So from the main study, that means with the 1,200 and something students, we did two factor analyses. One of them was an exploratory factor analysis with a subsample of 10% of the data, and then we confirmed that model, and it fit really well with the confirmatory factor analysis on the remaining sample. And the last paragraph, you can see statistics about how the EFA and CFA were everything was okay with the convenience of our data. In the table below, you see the factors, the number of items, and keyword examples, and the Cronbach alphas for each factor. And as you can see, the first thing that you can see is we now have 5 factors, but in the model that there was only 4. But you can see that the self-efficacy is now split into 2 different factors, and that was a big surprise for us. It was really we've never read about anything like that in the literature. There's not much literature on self-efficacy in oral communication, but still, we were really surprised and delighted with that result, because those 2 different factors of self-efficacy, that we call them norms and content versus showmanship, it's really 2 different concepts, 2 different constructs for us, and it's quite easy to differentiate between the 2 of them conceptually. For example, you can see in the column keyword examples that those are keywords taken from the items that construct each factor. For the SE norm and content, you can see that the keyword are, for example, words, clear, people understand. Rather than for showmanship, it's more contact, dynamic, interest. So it's really 2 different types of self-efficacy. Some students, or for let's say one factor, the factor norms and content, it's more about being able to do something that is clear, that people understand, and that is very scientifically accurate, because it's oral presentation in science. And the showmanship, it's quite different. I'm interesting. People like to hear when I talk to them, and I'm kind of dynamic and funny in front of the classroom. So that's really 2 different types of self-efficacy. So I think that's the reason that they separated into 2 really different and correlated, but really 2 different factors in the analysis. As I said, we picked a subsample of 10 students to conduct interviews, and to choose those 10 students, we conducted a cluster analysis to group or divide actually the sample into 3 groups of students. The pie chart on the left explains the complete sample. So 16% of the entire sample had low norms and content in SE, 57% had a medium, and only 27% had a high self-efficacy of norm and contents. So this distribution was represented in the interview sample. We try to have the same representativity of each cluster. So 1 student with low SE, 6 students of medium SE, and 3 students with high SE. Now, since we have those 2 separate constructs of self-efficacy, we revised our model, and now self-efficacy, as you can see, is really separated into 2 different concepts, and that's something that we are really happy with. The average score, that's at the top of the slide, the average score of SE norm and content is 2.9, and 2.9, that's really close to 3, And you have to remember that in our scale, our Likert scale, 3 would be I agree with the statement. So those students are really, really close to agreeing with, they have self-efficacy in the concept that we call norm and content. But for the showmanship, the average score for the entire sample is a bit less. It's a bit lower. It's 2.65. So that means our students, our population, or the sample that we questioned, they feel that they are better to express things in front of a group about science. They are clear. They explain the concepts really well, and people understand. Rather than they don't feel as much as, well, I'm really interested in dynamic in front of the classroom. So that could have been different, but maybe it's a characteristic of our science students who are really serious students, and they are used to have good grades from really early on in primary and secondary school. And that's one characteristic of our population in Quebec. We have on that slide correlation factors between the 5 factors of the PATOX. Yes, PATOX. As you can see, there is we present here the correlation between the two SEs and the other 3 factors. For example, there is a strong correlation between showmanship and anxiety at minus 0.47. It is a negative correlation. It's obvious why, because when you feel you are dynamic and interesting in front of the classroom, maybe you have less anxiety. So that's the reason that correlation is negative. At the opposite, you have a really, really strong correlation between SE showmanship and enjoyment. So someone who would be really dynamic and everything would feel that it's more pleasant to do an oral presentation, and that seems obvious. What is different and make you think about things is the SE norms and content. The correlation is stronger between norm and content and perceived relevance. So, and now we can recognize our, good students from early on. They think that it's really important to learn how to do oral presentation, and they feel that they are quite good of delivering content and being clear. So that's interesting. The correlation is a bit less between perceived relevance and showmanship. Okay, I think I talked about everything that is written down. And now I will be briefly discussing the interviews that we conducted. They were so rich. We did 10 interviews, but here you can see a graph. Don't try to figure out everything on that graph, but you can see all of our 10 students. Obviously, those names are pseudonyms. What you can just notice a bit is the dotted line is the mean for all the sample, and each line of color is one student, and it represents their score for each of the 5 factors that we measured. So for example, let's look at the red line, and I will be presenting the line for 3 different students. I will be talking about 3 of them a bit later on with more details, and I will present it more clearly. But for now, let's just look at the red line, the Victor's line. Victor had really high enjoyment of making oral presentation in science. He has also a really high self-efficacy that we call showmanship, and quite low anxiety. And you cannot see it here, but it's quite he has anxiety, like medium anxiety. At the opposite, you can see Sarah, the light blue one. She has really, really high anxiety, and she doesn't like it at all. She has the lowest enjoyment of the entire subsample. So let's look at what Vic, and you can see here on the right his graph. So all his scores for all of the factors compared to the mean. Victor said he talked about past experiences when he was younger. He said, I was homeschooled. My mother used to make me perform oral presentations for my family or their friends once a week. It unblocked a lot of my shyness. So, past experience for him was a reason that for him it was he was better at doing oral presentation now when he's an adult, young adult. Um, I just wanted to notice that these excerpts are free translations from French, and I'm sorry if I don't convey exactly the sense that and the meaning of all the students, what all the students meant. But okay, it's a rough translation. Um, he also talked about the importance of oral communication. As you can see, his perceived relevance is very high. It's at 4, it's the maximum. He said, oral communication is very important, not only in front of a group, but also in several aspects of our lives. So that's coherent with the score that we measured. In class, however, and that's the part where he's more severe with us, with the teachers. In class, however, they don't make us do it the right way. We don't learn to communicate, but rather we memorize a text to say what the teacher wants to hear. The emphasis is no longer on the quality of the message, but on getting good grades or saying what the teacher wants to hear. And that's sad because he really likes oral presentations, but he doesn't feel that we are doing it the right way. And more about that later on. Sarah, who was the one with really high anxiety and really low enjoyment, she talked about the way she prepared her oral presentation, and quite it's quite it quite it's quite sad. She said, I write down my text in advance and I practice a lot in front of my family. Then I film myself and I watch these videos. Maybe the excerpt here doesn't convey everything. She was so desperate. She practices a lot in front of her mirror and in front of her family, and still she doesn't feel ready and she doesn't feel well prepared when she has to come in class. She talks also about the relevance of oral communication. She has quite a high score of perceived relevance, but as you can see, maybe her perceived relevance was that we measured with the instrument was not really about what she feels for her, but maybe more a general way. She says, learning to do oral presentation is not important. We can say everything in writing instead. In science, we don't need to communicate emotions. That's something interesting. I don't know what you think about that. Moreover, we run the risk of making conceptual mistakes when speaking. I know that I won't be working in a domain which needs oral presentation. It is not relevant to me. So that's a part. She doesn't feel that it's relevant to her, but still she feels that it's important that people or her fellow colleagues learn how to do oral presentation. And about her anxiety, which was really high, she says, I really don't like it. It's way too much stress for a small 10 minutes. So it's heartbreaking, really, because she doesn't have the tools that can help her better be prepared, and it's really a torture for her to do oral presentation in class. Charlotte was a bit more closer to the mean. She also talks about the way she prepares her presentation, and she says it's more not only her but in general. If it looks like you recite a text, it's not interesting. I consider myself as dynamic. I do prepare text, but I don't sound like reciting a text. I don't recite exactly all the words. So that's her way of expressing that to be interesting, you have to not sound like you're reciting a text. And she has a quite high SE showmanship. And about her anxiety, which is medium, I've always been confident when speaking, especially when I'm well prepared. And she also talks about early experiences. She says, I've been to alternative primary schools. We were presenting a lot of our projects. And alternative primary school. I think you do have that in the US as well. So students work on small projects, and for for her experiences, it was all the projects were presented orally at the end. So with our interviews, we learned a lot more about in-depth personal experiences. One student recounted that he felt very confident in oral communication, and he explained that the reason why he felt that confident was because he was really involved in his church and he conducts Bible discussion sessions. So, and other students talked about other experiences outside of school. That's interesting. They don't feel that the foundation of their confidence or their ability to talk in front of a group, they don't feel that it comes from school. Most of them, they explain something that comes from outside of school. And one student, she recalled an oral presentation in elementary school where she started crying, and that event was it was one point in her life. It founded the rest of her lack of self-confidence and self-efficacy in the domain. And now she has avoidance behavior, actually. I I talked I brushed very really briefly on the classroom implications. Let's look a bit more on that. There is a need to develop pedagogical interventions around oral teaching because for now it's seldom taught in class. We ask students to do oral presentation, but often we don't teach them how to do it. Dwyer and Fuss suggested that we should do formative or oral presentation in class, and when we grade the students, and even when they are not graded, when it's formative, we should be really clear and we should provide accurate and objective assessment criteria, because when the students don't know what you will be looking at, maybe someone who has a very low self-efficacy showmanship, they would think that they have to do more and try to be more interesting. But if we look at the content, maybe it's not the right way of preparing themselves. Maybe we don't look at the showmanship of the thing. And if we have really clear criteria that would help students and that can reassure those who have high anxiety. And our interviews reveal several elements influencing self-efficacy. And now you see that I did not translate those two words, but positivement means positively and négativement means negatively, as you can figure out. So positively, they talked about early childhood experiences. They have little schools or little groups, and there was some really often an event that was a moment of glory. Someone talked about one time he animated a gala or something, and he had a standing ovation when he was in high school, and that was the moment that he knew he was able to talk in front of a group. And as I talk, most students talk about something regarding extracurricular activity. And what affects the self-efficacy negatively would be arriving at the college level, where it's way bigger than their high school, and they don't know as much people, and they have to explain new concept in science because it's suddenly it's real science. It's really different concepts that are taught post secondary level rather than at the secondary level. So they have to explain more difficult concept, and that's the reason they feel they are not quite as good as explaining them. Obviously, there are limitations of this research. The first one is, well, we conducted that with our population, French-speaking students in Quebec. The sample of participants was of convenience because we recruited all the students in 7 colleges, and only the one who agreed to participate did participate. And the students that we questioned were between 17 and 19 years old, so that's a really narrow window of age. And as I said before, complementary research in other cultures, languages, and age range would be really interesting and would be necessary to generalize. We had financial support from Ministry of Education in Quebec here, and I would like to take a few moments to thank my collaborators. Obviously, Simon Langlois, who was supposed to be with me in Portland, and the other collaborators, Claude-Émilie Marek, Julie Roberge, Frédéric Blouin, François Arsenault-Hubert, and our three research assistants, Oana, Gabrielle, and Elisabeth.